Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Jessica Devereaux in Baltimore. Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych fled Kiev after the parliament called for his removal. Now elections are to be held on May 25th. Authorities have issued an arrest warrant for Yanukovych and are holding him responsible for the deaths of protesters in recent months. Right now, Russia will retain the $15 billion loan package it offered to Ukraine in December until a new government is in place. Meanwhile, the U.S. and Russia have voiced support for a new IMF loan to assist the country with its economic problems. Here to discuss this, two guests. First, we have joining us Aleksandr Buzgalin. He's a professor of political economy at Moscow State University. Also, we have John Quigley. He's a professor emeritus of international law at Ohio State University, and he previously dealt with conflicts between Ukraine and Russia arising from the breakup of the USSR on behalf of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Aleksandr, I'm going to start off with you. Many commentators are trying to really discuss the uprising and the ouster of Yanukovych as an external manipulation by either the EU, Russia, and the US. And many also mention the EU deal as the cause of the protests, but clearly, by the scale of the protests alone, there's clearly some internal struggle that we're seeing happening between the governing elite. Can you just sort of break down these internal rivalries?
So, first of all, of course, there is big influence of European Union, of the United States government and officials. They're acting directly and through Poland. So it's true. The same I can say about Russian influence, and this is also true. But first of all, it was protest during many years. It was first Maidan, and now it's second Maidan. And people were angry and are angry about bureaucratic oligarchic regime which took place in Ukraine, and I'm afraid which will be restored again as it was after first Maidan. So this is first of all spontaneous protest from below, interconnected with struggle of elites and interconnected also with far-right activity. In Ukraine, during last years, or maybe even decades after collapse of the Soviet Union, appeared very strong and growing semi-fascist, very nationalistic movement, which is interconnected historically, and they connect themselves openly with fascists in Ukraine who supported German fascism and occupation of our countries and so on. So this is three different forces. Open protest of the people. Of course, in the beginning he was not open, but now it was open protest of the people who want to change the system, who wants to overcome bureaucratic oligarchic regime. First. Second, big influence from European Union, NATO countries, better to say, from one hand, and Russia from another hand. Third, fourth, struggle of pro-European and pro-Russian oligarch capitals in Ukraine. And this is extremely important factor which is behind all fights. And finally, these right-wing forces who are also now in the peak of their activity. And this is extremely dangerous for not only Ukraine, but for all over the world. In some aspects, Ukraine now was similar and is similar with Weimar Republic, and threat of far-right dictatorship as a result of chaos which took place now in Ukraine is maybe main factor and main threat, and we have to understand this and take into consideration.
John, you just heard Aleksandr really lay out those three different groups. I want to get your impression, though, of who's in control of the state now. What will they likely do now that they're in power?
Well, the interim government, if you can call it that, seems to be oriented towards closer ties with Europe. So I think they're clearly going to go in that direction. And I think Aleksandr was perfectly correct in saying that the outside powers have tried to influence things. I don't think that their outside influence proved decisive, at least has proved decisive so far. I think it has been internal considerations that have led to this change. But the United States was clearly trying to bring about a change in the government, as is clear from the telephone conversation that was overheard of Ms. Nuland talking with the U.S. ambassador in Kiev not long ago.
Aleksandr, what's your take?
So first of all, I partly agree with John, and I want to stress that now we have another contradiction. This is contradiction between the right bloc, real force which has power in the country. It's not parliament. It's not any former state organization. Now it's troops, I can say troops and groups of nationalists and the right bloc, this is their name, militants, who has weapons, by the way, very often NATO weapons, who are very well trained, who are very well organized, and among them there are a lot of professionals who had great experience of the direct street fight, even shooting and so on. So it's not just ordinary people who came with sticks. It's a very organized force and active in Kiev, first of all, but not only in Kiev, in many cities of Ukraine. And they are not big enthusiasts about joining to European Union. They want to have a self-independent Ukraine as a Ukrainian country with Ukrainian population, Ukrainian language, Ukrainian traditions, and this is right-wing nationalism, which is against both Russia, against European Union, and so on. And there is big conflict between Tymoshenko and other forces from one hand, and this right bloc from another hand. And there are also ordinary people who are also divided. They're divided because it is big contradiction between East and West of Ukraine. East is mainly Russian-speaking and more oriented on real production, steel, coal production. This is workers and ordinary people mainly, and pro-Russian oligarchs. West is more peasant and more oriented on the European Union business. Plus, this is also a big contradiction between people, and I can say majority of people, and such forces as Tymoshenko and their friends, because when Tymoshenko was prime minister, she was also very interconnected with bureaucratic oligarchic power, and ordinary people understand this very well. She is not hero, she is just victim of the struggle between two clans of oligarchs, nothing more. And this is very important and very well expressed in many interviews which we have in Russia.
Okay, I'm happy, Aleksandr, you mentioned that right-wing sector that is very nationalistic, wants Ukraine for Ukrainians, but it's undeniable that the Ukrainian border and the Russian border, obviously there's a considerable amount of migration between the two sides. And I'm going to quote an International Organization for Migration report in 2013, they said that it's the second largest migration corridor in the world, and that's only behind Mexico and the United States. So Ukraine also has an agreement with Russia to keep a Russian naval sea base. And can you just talk about the history?
A few words about Sevastopol. This is a Navy fleet base in Black Sea where there is both Ukrainian and Russian fleet. And by the way, this city is a Russian-speaking city, and it was also something like Maidan. But on the square, they elected new mayor, who is protector of Crimea as an independent, I can say, region, independent territory, which will be not joining to the European Union. And this is opinion of, I think, 90% of citizens of Crimea, except a very small part of Tatar population and a few others. So this is a big problem. In Odessa, million city, again, port in Black Sea, it was 10,000 demonstrations with weapons, so-called people's people's voluntary defense groups or something like that. I don't know how to translate exactly into English. And they said that they don't want to be inside the European Union, and especially they are against this slogan, Ukraine for Ukrainians and right bloc. So this is extremely contradictory situation on the border of civil war.
So, John, just talk about the history of the relationship between the two countries, particularly in terms of economic ties and how this might play a role in May elections.
Well, they've been together for hundreds of years, and the industrial heartland of the entire Soviet Union was in Ukraine, was in the eastern part of Ukraine, the industrial base that Aleksandr was mentioning. So the connection is very strong, and Ukraine is getting its fuel supplies from Russia at favorable prices. So it would be very difficult for Ukraine to completely disaffiliate with Russia in some kind of orientation to Europe. The situation is probably most difficult with respect to Crimea, which is territory that was actually part of Russia until 1954, when it was transferred into the Ukrainian Republic from the Russian Republic. Then when the Soviet Union split apart, Crimea found itself suddenly outside of an orientation with Russia, and that has led to very serious disputes. And in particular, because of the fact that the Black Sea Fleet, as Alexander mentioned, the fleet of the Soviet Navy, former Soviet Navy, now the Russian Navy, is based there. So that's been one of the major issues in conflict. And when Tymoshenko was in power, the Ukrainian government indicated that the fleet would have to leave. And now when Yanukovych came in, he extended the arrangement till, I think, the year 2042. So that's a major strategic issue. But in terms of the population, as Alexander said, in Crimea is very heavily Russian, very, very small Ukrainian component. The major minority there actually is the Tatars of Crimea, as he mentioned. And the people in Crimea are very concerned that they will suffer discrimination at the hands of a Ukraine that is in control of these more right-wing Ukrainian elements.
Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you, and I'm glad to be in contact anytime.
Yes, thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.